Him's House, episode 16. I'm Jonathan Stern. I'm here with Lewis Stevens and Dr. H. We also have a very special guest. He goes by the name Bayside. He is in the Him's House Discord. He is a professional lobbyist who works on HHS issues in Washington, D.C. He does not work on FDA issues, but is very familiar with federal law, federal regulations, and U.S. politics. Previously worked on Capitol Hill and in the White House. Now, yesterday, the FDA announced that the Tirzepatide shortage is resolved. Hims fell at 1.9 or 10% on the news. I think it closed down 7 or 8%. The Hims House Discord, which is the largest investor community for Hims, had 6,000 messages exchanged. Big day for Hims. Now, I want to say the reason that we have Bayside on the show today is that on, I think it was Wednesday evening, he dropped a 12-page research report into the Discord. I then took that and moved it into a Google Doc, which received, I need to check, but somewhere on the order of 500 or 1,000 views in the last couple days. In the Google Doc, he detailed exactly why the Tirzepatide shortage was likely to be declared by the FDA as resolved. Then yesterday, that prediction came true. It was certainly the best research and analysis that I saw on the topic anywhere on the internet. And ever since, Bayside has been sort of a village elder in the Hims House Discord. Anyway, that's enough for me. Bayside, welcome to the show. Can you kick us off with an overview of what happened yesterday, why it matters for Hims, and what we need to be watching for what may happen next?
Happy to do so. First, it's great to be invited to be on with this cast of village elders because you guys have been doing fantastic work, and I've been one of the folks eagerly watching your videos. So the date that piece was dropped, it was actually Sunday night, and I did not anticipate that it would get the level of attention that it did. I mostly expected to get razzed and told that I didn't know what I was talking about. So I was pleasantly surprised that did not turn out to be true. I should also say that I've been getting actually quite the reverse of that. I've been getting a lot of really nice comments from folks in the Discord who were interested, and I guess a few folks actually saved some money because of it, which is real. I'm really glad to hear. The other reason why I was a little bit hesitant, because I don't care how smart we think we are, there's always that chance that you can be wrong. And so the last thing I wanted to do was cost anybody money. So I tried to include all of that in the disclaimers. But that said, it did represent my best professional judgment. And as you noted, I've worked with HHS on other issues. I definitely know how they work. And I also know the politics on Capitol Hill and so forth. And that all informed that judgment. So I think your question was kind of, do you want me to summarize kind of what I said or give me a question on that?
Yeah. So first, just for those who may not be aware of what happened, let's do a quick overview of the news yesterday, sure, why it matters for Hims. And there's been some chat this morning about what we should be watching next. So maybe let's do those three things.
Sure. So obviously we've got an announcement from the FDA yesterday morning at 9 a.m. It was funny because I started to backtrack a little bit just before that, because one of the other things I know about politics is that people leak. And I thought that for sure OFA was in touch with the FDA the prior day, just because it doesn't make sense. You're gonna spring this on them that morning and then expect them to give you a joint report by the end of the day. That is not a lot of time to work with. So I was trying to game out, what does it mean that OFA probably knows and then hasn't said anything? But it turns out it does look like actually did just give it to him at the very last minute that morning. And sometimes agencies will do that. So for those, again, who don't know, the bigger issue, a couple of big issues, is that these GLP-1s have been on shortage for quite some time. The two main manufacturers are Lilly, which puts out Mounjaro, and what is the other one? Zepbound, which is basically Tirzepatide. And that was the version of the GLP-1 that was under consideration for points of this conversation. Nevertheless, the big one in terms of Hims is the other one, Semaglutide, which is essentially the patent for that is owned by Novo Nordisk over in Europe. And they are a closer situation. I'm sure we'll get into that later. But they were not the focus of the lawsuit. So we were all waiting in eager anticipation of this date and whatever it was that FDA was going to do. Generally speaking, a lot of sort of the other leading luminaries out there, including our friend, I can't pronounce his Twitter name, Actima, whatever it is, the guy in Europe who seems to be so well connected to what's going on in HIMSS. He figured it would be a push, and I ended up responding to that because he'd mentioned me on his Twitter feed. But
is that right, Bayside? So his official prediction was that they would delay again or push.
I don't want to overstate it. I think if I remember correctly, his response was Reddit thought it was a well-balanced piece, but I think what he said is I won't be surprised if they push. So I wouldn't say he said it definitely would happen. I think he said he wouldn't be surprised. Some others, including the folks, Dave Knapp, who runs the fairly well followed on GLP-1 podcast. His audience is a mix of investors, but also just users, right? And he has shown he's very well connected within the compounding industry. And I actually reached out to him when he did say he thought it would be a push. And I reached out to him because he does have these connections and said, so are you basing that on any more recent information than just this conversation that you had with the attorney a week ago? And the answer was no. And I said to him, you really should think about just actually reaching out and getting better information than that. See what they're saying now. And he never responded to that. I mean, but some people, because he got a prediction wrong a month ago, were really discounting him. And I thought that he might have been on to something that was just a little bit early. And I mentioned that in the analysis. So anyway, and then at the very last minute, Hunter Brook came in with an analysis, which eerily looked a lot like mine. And I can't say for sure that they read what I put out there, but it wouldn't surprise me if they had. It was really close. Anyway, so when you put Hunter Brook in their own separate reporting plus me, that at least made people question it, I think. So anyway, we get into, this all happened earlier in the week. And then the results of the FDA decision got posted first thing in the morning, which surprised me a little bit. And then the stock, of course, came down nowhere near as much as I expected. And even there, I didn't expect it to drop that much because it's Tirzepatide, not Semaglutide or Semaglutide, as some people pronounce it. I'll defer to others out on the pronunciation.
Tomato.
Yeah, I have a feeling it was like that. So at the same time, so you've got short covering that's out there. We're at Christmas time. So a lot of the institutional trading kind of fades away. I mean, retail seems to control what's going on this time of year more so. And so at last time I checked, as of this podcast, I think the stock has recovered fairly nicely from the lows. Not completely, but the big outstanding question is not Tirzepatide. There was some thoughts that HIMSS might get into that. There was that image that suggested that maybe they might do that. But Semaglutide, if I'm pronouncing it that way, is the big one for HIMSS. And so then people are saying, I think there's some podcasts out there in the HIMSS world going, repeat after me. This was not about Semaglutide. This was about Tirzepatide, which HIMSS does not sell. And so there is no direct impact. And even our friend in Europe, the guy who responded initially said the exact same thing. And I'm thinking, no, people are missing the boat on this. So if you read the analysis, which I guess we can get into details, I'll leave it to you how much you want me to do on that. But there's both a political discussion and then a read on the court case and the law. The political discussion, which was the initial part of what I wrote, and I focused on that. It is clear that FDA does not like compounders. They've got a couple of decades of just fighting it out with compounders on a variety of reasons because mostly safety related issues, which those are good reasons to fight it, with compounders. But more recently, they really don't like what's going on with GLP-1s. They kind of tone it down in their comments because that's what federal agencies do. But all of the others out there in pharma world, including the American Diabetes Association and a few others, the National Association of Pharmacists, they're like, this stuff is crazy. And it's not because they're criticizing people like HIMSS. HIMSS in particular is a good actor, and they're building a good brand, which is really important. I'm really glad to see Andrew Dudum do that. especially in this world. You don't want to be getting drugs off the internet from somebody you don't trust. But that said, despite the fact that Hims is a good actor, that does not mean that's nothing but good actors who are out there. And frankly, the FDA is like on a tear, wanting to take care of that situation. Politically speaking, the current FDA chief is very much pro pharma and very well connected to pharma. I'm sure he's easing off a little bit because he knows from the attorneys you can't, if you blow a case and lose, that is a bad deal for the FDA. They do not want to lose. So they said, okay, we're going to let the lawyers take the lead on this. But that said, if at all possible, we want the shortage situation to end before Trump comes into office, because if we don't get it done before then, we don't know when those confirmations are actually going to happen. This compounding thing could be going on well into the summer, just while we wait for the Senate to confirm people, unless they do, when they're on recess, get them in that way. So that's all political backstory. And I should clarify, I want to differentiate between what I'm speculating about and what I know. Have I actually had a conversation with anyone inside FDA about this? Absolutely not. But I know how to read the tea leaves. It's well documented that the current FDA head is very close to pharma. It's also very well documented in all the ways the FDA is pro pharma, including FDA covers like 3/4 of their budget. They've got an army of lobbyists. They give out campaign contributions left and right. Both of the most recent FDA chiefs, including under Trump and Biden, were pro pharma, and demonstrably so. And they are freaked out about, not about Hims, but they're freaked out about the illegal stuff that's happening out there that's causing deaths. People are dying from this stuff. So,
Bayside, just to jump in real quick, when you
sure.
say the current administration, the current FDA head, you're referring to the Biden administration.
Correct.
The current FDA head. This is not a comment on the Trump administration or Marty McCary.
Absolutely. I did comment about that, but that's not what I'm talking about right now. The people in charge of Biden.
McCary's been nominated to be the new FDA head, and maybe we'll get to that today or in a future episode. But
yeah, I'm glad you clarified that. So yes, Biden's people are in charge right now, and I never thought that they would defer. I never thought that they were punting back in October or November because they were going to defer to the incoming administration. In fact, if anything, I felt the election probably accelerated things. So from a purely like reasoning point of view, most of these people who are political are going to go back and work for pharma, just like Gottlieb does right now. So they're not going to let it sit out there. And also just professionally, if you think people are out there are dying because of bad actors, again, not Hims, but if you think people are out there are dying, do you want to go back and say, well, you didn't do everything you could to stop that from happening? No, they're going to do whatever they can. So the limiting factor is not the politics, it's the legal side. And the legal side is not as easy. So I do think when I did in the full analysis, I showed just how the legal issues were probably easily addressed when it came to Tirzepatide. And then actually, if you look at some independent sources and not what Roe and Hims were putting out there as tracking, and actually if you understood what was going on with those trackers, then you would have realized, as I concluded, that Tirzepatide was almost certainly going to go off shortage this week. And then when our friend from Denmark, Sweden, I don't know where he's from, commented on it, I got into some additional stuff, just it's inside baseball, why they were going to actually make the decision and not punt. Basically because the judge in the court wasn't going to let him do that. And if he thinks they're messing around, he's just going to say, I'm not going to let you extend it. These attorneys work with these judges all the time. They have a much bigger fish to fry on an ongoing basis. They don't want to undermine their credibility. When they ask for a certain amount of time, the judge is deferring to them on that, but he could easily not do it. So they're not going to blow it. So I knew it was going to come in on the date that it did, or at least reasonable confidence. So that's all plays out for Tirzepatide. The big question, I think Tirzepatide is done. I'll just let me finish on that. I'll turn it back to you guys because I don't want to go on too long. But going forward, the next step on Tirzepatide is that over the next couple of weeks, they need to figure out whether or not there's going to be an injunction request from OFA, which they probably will do. But I think they're going to lose, because for the judge to say, you know what, this case is telling us we can't let the FDA go ahead and enforce. We're going to stop and do an injunction and prevent FDA from enforcing this new determination. That would require the judge to decide that OFA's case was so good and compelling that they were going to take that extraordinary measure and actually issue an injunction. From my read of the documents that came out yesterday, in fact, if anything, it's the other way around. FDA's case is strong enough that OFA is going to lose. And they're not going to get the injunction. So if that doesn't happen, and we'll know that within a month, the clock is still ticking. 60 and 90 days is what was in the materials that came out yesterday. I think we're into February and March before the shortage ends in terms of enforcement purposes. That clock is still going to be ticking. None of the injunction stuff is going to delay it. So that'll be done. And then it'll be up to the OFA to decide, you know what, we're going to keep this case going forward anyway, but that's a lost cause. If they don't get the injunction, a case is going to take, at best, it's later this year, and it could easily go into next year. By that time, forget it. It's over. It's just a moot point. So as far as I'm concerned, Tirzepatide is done. It's a done deal. It's not coming back. But that doesn't necessarily tell you about Semaglutide. Semaglutide is harder. Demonstrably, if you track what Novo has been saying, they've been dealing with shortages, especially in the low dose version, like the introductory. You can actually go in places like Amazon and very easily get the higher doses right now. But the low doses are kind of the issue. And the Novo leadership team, their CEO, admitted that. They said something back in September, which was quoted in Reuters, which admitted they were having problems with low doses and availability. But they said that would be addressed. It would extend into Q4, which is where we are right now. And then in November, they said, we've dealt with it. It's done. So low doses we think are fine. And that's what the CEO said. Now, you can be skeptical, and rightly so. Just because the Novo CEO said that does not mean everything's hunky-dory. But you got to throw it in there as a data point. And then I went out and looked at some of the external things on Reddit and other places to see how much this stuff is accessible. And basically all the folks on Reddit were saying they can get Semaglutide too in all the different doses from places like Walmart and Amazon, Sam's Club, and Costco. Some of the problematic areas are the smaller pharmacies and CVS. And then that brings me to the last page, was everyone's pointing to the HIMSS data trackers, and they're pointing to the rows, and they're like, wait, thousands of people are claiming there's shortages. This can't be happening. And so what's going on with that? Well, the thing is that if you're someone walking into a pharmacy and you say, I want to fulfill this prescription that I got for Semaglutide, and they say, we can't do it, you're assuming it's because the drug is in shortage. What you're not assuming as a customer is that there are supply chain problems, that, actually your pharmacy loses money on your GLP prescription, that their wholesaler loses money on the GLP-1 prescription. They're not really interested in because they're not making money on it, and making sure that those, that all the drug that you possibly can need is in their particular supply chain. And FDA said that too. They very clearly, and that was also my analysis, they said, listen, and they said clearly, just because you cannot get the drug at your pharmacy does not mean it's in shortage. They very specifically said that. And so then you have to say, okay, who do we believe? Do you believe Big Pharma and FDA, who are claiming that the shortage is not ongoing, or do you believe the customers who are saying that it is? And that's why I said, on this one, it's not clear cut. It's about a 50-50 deal. That's just based on my best judgment of what's going on. I think if it's close, the FDA pushes it through, and they do so within the next 3 months, in which case Semaglutide is off shortage too. That happens, HIMSS goes down. But if it's not close, they don't want to lose a case, in which case they punt. And that's good for HIMSS, because if they punt, HIMSS can keep doing it for however long until the new administration comes in and figures out what to do. So let me stop there. That's kind of the verbal version of what I'd said in my report on Sunday night.
Fantastic, Bayside. Thank you for all of that. One quick follow-up related to the HIMSS supply tracker. It was referenced in the November court filing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
There was some... I'm not sure I fully understand or even represented what was going on there in the footnote.
Yeah.
Correctly, like in a past podcast episode or in a newsletter or in the Discord. Could you detail for us exactly what it meant when that was included in the court filing a month plus ago?
Yeah, that's super easy. There was a lot of misunderstanding around that. So what that court filing was a joint report. A joint report ideally is something that the parties are agreeing on, but the parties don't always agree. So they will do their own separate sections on the parts where they have not agreed. The footnote representing the HIMSS tracker was in the OFA's portion of the report. It was not in any way endorsed by the FDA. Some people felt that the FDA must have been endorsing that. They were not.
Great. Yeah, I almost certainly at one point said this was included in the FDA's report, and that's not correct. So I wanted to set the record straight there.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bayside.
No worries.
Cool. Well, let's turn it over to Lewis and Dr. H for a quick reaction, and then we'll maybe get to what this means for HIMSS 6 months out and longer term.
Bayside, I got some questions. And first, thanks for all that inside kind of perspective and everything. That's really great to help everyone understand what's going on with all these court issues. My question is, you mentioned that the FDA, your belief is the FDA is clearly going after compounders, the bad actors, and separating HIMSS as a potentially good actor.
Correct.
I did see one of their warning letters the FDA released to 3 compounding pharmacies, and I looked at them, and I mean, yeah, they were kind of bad actors. They were selling research grade GLP-1s that weren't meant for actual consumer usage. Their website also listed other, I would say, probably sham medical treatments. So is there any situation where you can think where the FDA would create some kind of like an exception or something like that, where good actors like HIMSS can operate in this realm and prescribe medicine like that? Or does it not work that way and they're just going to be lumped into the same category?
Under current law, I don't think they can do that. For example, although we'll see. Let's see where we go on this. So under current law, they can't do it, and if they did, they get sued by the pharmaceutical companies because the law is what the law says. And that said, FDA does have some discretion with respect to enforcement, which they've shown plenty of discretion there. So maybe if something that extraordinary were to happen, and that would be extraordinary, I only see that happening not if the incoming FDA chief said to do something like that. I think that would have to be pressure coming from the White House. Now, as it turns out, Elon Musk has been very pro, let's increase supply to these drugs. I think we've seen some of those tweets on that. And as we've all seen, he does have the ear of Trump. So if Elon Musk convinces Trump that we should try to do something on this, it opens some possibilities. So while I do not think the FDA itself would do something like that, if the president decided, we need to do something here, the FDA is going to, within the law, will do all they can to comply with whatever Trump tells them to do. So but let's make no mistake, that would be an extraordinary measure. And I don't have any, other than what we've all seen in tweets, I don't have any other information about that than that.
Is there any, I'm trying to think of that situation that you mentioned there with Elon Musk. What would Musk's motivations be to kind of be pro compounding versus being more in the pocket of pharma, who has, as you mentioned, lots of lobbying power and money? Yeah. Why would the richest person in the world want to be pro like small guy compounding?
Well, first of all, he's not in the pocket of anybody because he's the richest man in the world, and he doesn't really care what pharma thinks. And he's not, frankly, he's also not politically savvy enough to do a lot of these things. He's a smart guy. I wish I had his money. Do not discount him at all, but he's not the most politically savvy guy in the world. He shoots his mouth off a lot online because he can. If I had that kind of money, they call it that, F money. I won't say the word on your podcast, but you can do whatever you want in those circumstances. And so that's it. Why would he be motivated? I think because he used to be heavy. He's carried some weight in the last few years. I think he's sensitive to health issues. I think he just sees the value. Really, I think it's that.
I can see that. He's really in tune with what image he wants to portray. I feel like he wants to portray himself as the modern, day Iron Man or something like that. So I can see that point of view.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Elon Musk is going to be like Brian Johnson. He's microdosing GLP-1s. He's microdosing finasteride, probably microdosing some testosterone. I mean, he's he's buying the whole pharmacy at Hims.
Yeah. Brian Johnson did just release that thread on microdosing GLP-1s.
I keep seeing references to that. I haven't actually seen what that was.
It just came out like yesterday or the day before.
Okay.
Well, he's probably experimenting with some other things on his menu. I mean, it's all there. It's all there to be a handsome billionaire.
Yeah.
Bayside, there's been some mention. Andrew Dudum has expressed some, over the past months, some great confidence that he could potentially continue doing the semaglutide with some personalization. And to my knowledge now, the personalization that's offered are variances of the dosages compared to Ozempic or Wegovy. And there's been some debate in the Discord. Like, is that enough of a personalization factor to continue to do that? Do you have any like thoughts or opinions on that?
Yeah, this is one where I think you'll have an advantage over me. To my knowledge, to get away with this, there needs to be a medically compelling reason. And there are some potentially medically compelling reasons. I'm curious to know what you think about this. But you probably remember that it was several weeks ago, Hims put out a report which was describing the results they were getting with their GLP-1s and their weight loss work in general. And they said that nausea and vomiting were two issues that are very commonly associated with GLP-1s, and that you could potentially address that. And I believe Hims has addressed that by doing some compounding to it. And that's a medical reason, right? Now, my only point of questioning that is, does it need to be compounded with the GLP-1 versus just giving them the same drug separately? So does that justify the compounding exemption? I'm less certain about that. The other issue that they flagged was muscle loss. So, I think they're trying to address that somewhat with these bars that they're selling, because I assume that they're high protein. But again, is there a compounding issue there? I don't know. That would have to do with protein loss and things like that when you're in a negative calorie state. So I don't know if you could address that with compounding. I was talking about this with somebody else offline, and we estimated based on the numbers in that Hims report, and they were showing basically they were doing way better than people just taking the branded medication without any of these other things added to it. And I believe that that's probably true. So that suggests, based upon their own numbers, it might be in the range of 10 to 20% of what they're selling right now they can keep for medically necessary reasons under the personal compounding exemption. But that said, I'm not a doctor, so I'm going to defer to people who are.
I think from a medical standpoint, if you can demonstrate that the variances in dosages actually truly result in a different result, for example, Ozempic is available in 1 milligram and 2 milligrams, then there isn't much in between, really. If you could demonstrate, obviously it would be just per the patient report. They have to self-report this, and everyone has to take it at face value. But if they can say, hey, the 1 milligram was too weak for me, but the 2 milligram Ozempic was too much and too many side effects, but the 1.3 or 1.4 works great. I think medically that gives some good weight to your claim, but I'm just wondering from a legal standpoint, like, is this going to be a huge battle where does Hims lawyers team have enough backing to really take this to court and vouch for these results?
Yeah,
that's what I was wondering. Like, is that
Well, actually, before I give you the legal answer, what's your medical judgment? What percentage do you think, if medically necessary is in fact the standard, what percentage of those GLP-1s, in your opinion, do you think they'll be able to keep doing on a personalized basis?
I mean, patients are going to want to have the most affordable option. And the realistic part of me thinks that, hey, I can't afford, if I was the patient, if I can't afford those Ozempic, even if I feel a little bit better on personalized dosage, I'm going to tell the doctor this works so much better for me. So there's always that point of view where I'm like, okay, what's the actual true results of this versus what is the patient going to say to tell me to get this medicine covered? And we see this sometimes with issues with other medicines too when we're trying to do prior authorization requests for other brand name medicines. So, for example, an insurance company may decline a prescription for a brand name, let's say blood pressure medicine or something like that, and the doctor's trying to prescribe a different one. They have to fill out forms that say basically, what's your experience like with this other medicine? And you list all the other medicines. And when we're doing these forms, the doctor's just saying, hey, what happened when you were on X medicine? And then the patient would just say, oh, I felt like crap, So we're going off of what the patient is telling us.
Right.
And, the doctor's not inside the patient's house watching these observed side effects. We're going off of what's self-reported. So I'm just curious, like, how much weight would a self-reported experience from the patient be in terms of a legal battle where, HIMSS is trying to advocate for usage of these custom dosages and things like that? Everything that they're gathering is all subjective kind of information that is reported from the patient.
My reading on the law is that the courts will give substantial deference to the opinion of the doctor. That said, there is one other potential point of vulnerability, which is that assumes that the doctor is genuinely independent. One of the things that the short folks like Hunter Brook have talked about is that they think that HIMSS is potentially vulnerable, being challenged on whether those doctors are as independent as they say. And if they really want to get nasty, they could go over after HIMSS on that or threaten to do so. Now, that said, and you probably know this better than I do, my understanding is that there's a whole bunch of, not just HIMSS, this notion of you're not supposed to have corporate practice of medicine is very widespread within all sorts of healthcare institutions around the country. This is not a HIMSS specific issue. So I strongly suspect HIMSS is pretty well lawyered up on that issue. But it's possible that if, Novo or somebody else wanted to get nasty, they would go after whether or not the doctors are as independent as they claim. At the end of the day, you would know that. But if that's okay, then to the best of my knowledge, then the doctor's judgment stands. And if it's a genuinely independent opinion by a doctor, then, to some extent, the sky's the limit. Then it's just the question is how often are the doctor's going to actually do that? So I kind of put it back in your court.
I'm sorry, I have to get in. We have Ozempic that's offering, you said 1 milligram and 2 milligram. I don't know if that's exact, but they're offering something at the low end, something at the high end. What is stopping them from offering a range of intermediate options? And why wouldn't they do this in the event that HIMSS capitalizes on the in-between dosages?
I'm not sure I followed the question. So, sorry to make you repeat it one more time. So is that to me or, by the way, or is that to Dr. H?
It could be to both. I guess why the idea is that HIMSS could offer GLP-1s in dosages that, say, Lilly and Novo don't offer. Let's just take Novo. Yeah. Novo does not offer, right?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't Novo then start to offer those dosages?
Well, probably it's expensive. I mean, at the end of the day, my guess is that if HIMSS keeps this pretty moderate in the 5 to 20% range, probably they'll let it slide. If it ends up being like HIMSS is trying to personalize everything or 50% or more, then they're like, we can't now. This is we're gonna have to go after them on this. And so, where is that judgment call that you want to actually sue HIMSS? And they'll get a cease and desist letter no matter what.
I think we've discussed this in the past. The idea that Andrew Dudum has discussed the rationale for, creating personalized dosages. He's been extremely forthright in stating that there is clear legal precedent for creating these personalized dosages. And it's worth reminding, I understand this is just a board member and very cynical folks will say that this one of the smartest people on earth as it relates to compounding drugs and branded drugs and just global pharmaceutical sales. He's not a valuable advisor representing shareholders as a board of director. People have said that, but I do think it's worth noting that Kerr Schultz is on the team, and he headed Teva Pharmaceutical, which is the largest generic drug maker on earth, and who has been very friendly with branded drug makers recently. and he was the CEO and president of Novo Nordisk. So,
Yeah.
in terms of, and Andrew Dudum's brilliant, UPenn grad. There's a little bit of conjecture in what I'm about to say, but it relates to a discussion we had formerly on this podcast today, and that's the idea that Hims is, in the NFL, there's coaching trees. Like Bill Parcells was a great coach from whom Andy Reid today, leading the 13-1 Chiefs, emerged. So there's coaching trees in Silicon Valley as well, and Hims is one branch of the entire PayPal mafia, which currently runs the government. With Elon Musk and Peter Thiel's surrogate politician in the form of J.D. Vance. Hims. Everyone talks about Hims as if it's going to be stepped on like an ant by the giant pharmaceutical companies, but it's a very formidable team. There's a lot of very smart people on this team.
What do you think happens if it gets reported that Andrew Dudum was actually talking to Elon Musk directly? What happens to the stock then?
I'm sure. Everybody's pulling on Elon Musk coattails.
That's true.
I did have a question for you, Bayside. I think you touched on it, but I was wondering your perspective. What do you think the implications of Tirzepatide coming off of shortage are for Semaglutide? Do you think that will accelerate the timeline on which the shortage is removed for Semaglutide, or do you think it extends? It's neutral. There's like a supply and demand dynamic for both of these drugs.
Yeah, there's two answers to that. First, with respect to the analysis that I had on Sunday, I'd said at that time it was 80% chance that Tirzepatide would actually go the way it did. 20% was just to allow for any unknowns. At the same time, I said it was probably 50-50 chance that something similar would happen on Semaglutide. Since the Tirzepatide decision did in fact go the way I expected, I raised my estimate from 50% to 70% over the next month prior to when Trump comes into office. So I do think they are going to make that decision to take Semaglutide off of shortage. That said, embedded within your question is kind of a different question, which is, okay, Tirzepatide is off shortage. You got all these people who are on the compounded version of that, who presumably are going to get shifted to something else, probably compounded Semaglutide, if they can't afford brand. So now you got even more people taking the compounded version of Semaglutide. What happens when they take that one off shortage too? Now you got all these people, some unknown number of people who are currently taking compounded who've had it cut off. And believe me, we already know there's going to be a whole lot of yelling and screaming about that. If you go to Reddit, you see it already. So that matters. And then just from a legal point of view, what percentage of them are going to end up taking the branded drug? Because that affects the legal definition of a shortage. If suddenly you got all these people going to go, all right, we're going to go pay $1,000 a month. But the FDA actually addressed that issue in their decision yesterday. Buried within that letter is a reference to what happens when the people who lose the compounding people, specifically said, what happens to them? What impact will that have on demand? And they said that it was very short, because one of the things we haven't seen is the more detailed report, which has a lot of corporate insider information that's considered proprietary. So that's not out there. So a lot of the details we haven't seen. But they basically said, we considered that. We think that Lilly is fully capable of handling any increased demand that's attributable to taking Tirzepatide off shortage in terms of compounding moving. They didn't say this part, but there have been studies that are out there that have actually looked at price elasticity and demand on this stuff. And what you find out is virtually everyone who's taking the branded drug either has really good insurance, which pays for it still, that's becoming less likely, or they are having a household income of $250,000 or more if they're paying cash. Almost all the people who are using the compounded drug are not that. They don't have good insurance, and they don't have a household income of $250,000 or more. So almost certainly, overwhelmingly, people are going to places like Hims, don't have the money to pay for cash, and they don't have enough insurance. Otherwise, they would be going and paying $25 instead of $200 or whatever the number is that Hims is actually changing. It's cheaper on insurance if you got good insurance, the people who are doing that probably don't get it. So embedded within what FDA said yesterday is we don't think a whole lot of these compounded people are going to generate a whole bunch of demand for the branded drug. That's, in a way, it's kind of good for HIMSS, because where do you think they're going to go? They're going to go to the oral drugs, or a few of them might go to liraglutide. But I first thought that liraglutide was going to be the great savior, and then people like Dr. H and others said, nah, not so much. And I'm like, well, you would know. So, but the oral drugs will still be doing healthy business when compounding goes away.
Less than 50% of the cost, 70% of the impact.
Yeah, and higher margins and all that. So that's a big. I said maybe 10 to 20% will be able to stay on a compounded version of a GLP-1. Overwhelmingly, most of the rest are going to go to the orals, is my guess. And that's a big question. We'll have to see what that looks like. But anyway, I hope I answered your question. I don't think that coming off of the shortage is going to, in any major way, in the FDA's eyes, cause them to change their mind.
I think the response was perfect. And I know that response is going to create a ton of value for a lot of listeners, because that has been a murky point of contention. And the fight's still not over. There's been we lost a battle, but war continues on.
Yeah.
I think Dr. H has a hard stop in like 9 minutes. I want to ask one more sort of speculative question. Feel free to answer as quickly as possible so that we can get more in. But I want to get this in, which is that some people are talking about the possibility that HIMSS could partner with Novo to offer branded GLP-1s in the same way that Ro has partnered with Lilly to offer their branded GLP-1s. How does the decision that happened yesterday impact the possibility that we could see a Novo HIMSS partnership at some point?
Well, that board member you mentioned a second ago could actually make that deal happen pretty darn easily. I thought that was a natural, even before any of this stuff was happening, I thought that was a natural thing. But everyone on Discord says, no way, the margins aren't good enough. It'll never happen for that reason. And okay, that may be possible, but it seems like it's hanging out there. The last thing, because I know you get limited time, I think that that's short-sighted, because it's not just about Novo. There are any number of pharmaceutical companies that are out there that are making all kinds of drugs. How many grade A direct-to-consumer companies are out there? Not that many, and HIMSS is the best. I think that HIMSS could do a number of deals like that. But others who seem to know more than me think that including Bank of America, seems to think that HIMSS wouldn't do that because it's a low margin business.
Yeah, I think it's not a bad business, because that's how pharmaceutical drugs have been sold at primary care physicians for the last 100 years. So it's not, they get a CRM with Pfizer and they work from there as partners, and it's profitable. The question is, though, and it's a valid question, I personally am going to lean bullish because HIMSS is such a phenomenally executed business. But the question is, what's the net present value of this product line, considering the customer acquisition cost of a digitally native primary care physician, effectively? So that would be the debate, is can they acquire the customers such that the net present value of all of those branded drug cash flows is positive and worth their while and clears the hurdle rate that they have internally as a business? So there is, valid skepticism, I think, there.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head.
I'll say, Dr. H, you noted that, as a digital healthcare doctor, you noted that there was cessation of prescribing Tirzepatide on certain platforms in the preceding months, and now we know why. Lots of value from the HIMSS house.
Yeah. Anyway, I really appreciate you guys having me on the podcast today. I wasn't expecting this, but you guys do fantastic work and really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you again for coming on the show, Bayside. It was, I think, 15 minutes before we pressed the record button that I sent you a DM and said, any chance you're free. So just want to say thank you again for coming on such short notice. haven't checked with Lewis and Dr. H, but I'll say you're welcome more than any time. This has been really, really educational, and anytime we can meet a member of the Discord in voice, and unfortunately no video, but maybe someday, who knows? Anyway, voice.
I think once I retire, if I manage to get there, you can get me on video.
Exactly. Just thank you so much for your time. This has been Him's House, episode 16.
Thank you, Bayside.
Thank you, Bayside.
Thank you.